Okay, perfect. So I welcome you all. Let's start with the introduction to our today's guest. So I am delighted to welcome Frans De Waal, a primatologist and a biologist. He is a professor emeritus at Emory University, Atlanta. He has been working with different pillars of humanity and will discuss more about his work today. And he has written some amazing books, Chimpanzee Politics, Mama's Last Hug. So I welcome you, Frans.
You're welcome.
So just to start with with your career, you've had an amazing career, starting as an observer, a primatologist, watching Mama's colony, then moving on to going to the US, working with capuchin monkeys, working with elephants, and writing Mama's Last Hug. So what do you think about your journey? How do you feel?
I feel good about it. I think a journey like that is often put together by accident. So it's not when I was a kid that I wanted to study chimpanzees. I was very interested in animals for sure, but through circumstances I've ended up with working with mostly with primates, with monkeys and apes. And the beauty of monkeys and apes is, of course, that comparison with humans is very easy because humans are primates. So it's very easy to make these comparisons. And so I write popular books that dwell on that. And writing as a popular author is not logical for every scientist. There's lots of scientists who never do that. But I was always attracted to communicating with a general audience.
Yes, indeed. So today so in general, if we see in humanity or in humans, we have that sort of confusion, right? That all the values that we get, whether they are from culture or they are biological, means they are inherent to us. So this is what sort of we'll discuss today for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then we can take some questions from the audience as well.
Okay.
To start with our title of the talk today, Humanity 2.0, Lessons from Our Cousins. So do you think, why should we study animals? Do you think there are lessons there for humanity?
Yeah, I think there are big lessons because Western philosophy, for sure, but I think other philosophies, human philosophies as well, draw a sharp line between humans and animals, as if humans are not animals, which is a silly statement for a biologist. Humans are, of course, animals. We have DNA and lungs and hearts like everybody else. So I see that as a major flaw of Western philosophy, to draw that line and to try to set us apart and say that our minds are certainly different, they would say, but even everything else about humans is certainly different. The current crisis, the pandemic, but also the climate crisis, I think are a product of that kind of thinking, is where we think we can do anything we want with Earth. We are the boss here. There's even a book, The Masters of the Universe, that's about humans. So we are the boss and we can do whatever we want. That's the attitude, and that's also in philosophy and in religion is often what is promulgated, is that we can do whatever we want, we are the boss here. And I think in my work I try to emphasize that we are animals. Our mental capacities are very similar to those of other animals. We are definitely primates. If you look at human DNA, it's very close to chimpanzees and bonobos. It's in fact, human DNA is as close to that of the chimpanzee as the two DNAs of African and Asian elephants are to each other. We call them both elephants. And so it's extremely close. And so my task is to point out that we are animals among other animals. And I think Western philosophy has put us on this disastrous path of saying that humans are not part of nature, humans are sort of outside of nature. And it has been a constant struggle. Of course, Darwin has been part of that struggle. There's a constant struggle for us biologists to say that we are a product of nature and part of nature.
Indeed, I mean, that does make sense. But And I think that a lot of confusion also comes because of these complex values that we get. I mean, of course, there is this simple biology that there are genes, DNA, and then that makes up these organisms which are sitting there consciously talking about the same processes. Um, and to go on from there and take, let's say, the first thing that we can talk about is rationality. So what do you think? Are we rational? Are we rational beings? Are like the other apes, they are rational?
Well, we have a lot of cognitive capacities that we share with other animals, but I would not call a chimpanzee a rational being, and I would not call humans a rational being. Humans are driven by emotions. The most important decisions we take in life, let's say, who you're going to marry. This seems like an important decision to me. Is that a rational decision? I don't think so. It's an emotional decision. So it's a body decision, basically. So we are rational beings to some degree, but it is totally overrated, I think, what the ratio do. And if you look at the modern literature from psychology, you notice probably that intuitive processes and emotional processes often have priority over these rational processes that we value so much. And if we were truly rational, we would not be doing to the planet what we're doing today. And so I think we are driven by a lot of emotions. And in that regard, we are very similar to other primates. I don't think we have emotions that they don't have and the other way around. And rationally, yes, we have language. I consider that a very special capacity. Language is very important and is uniquely human. So we have language, but basic rationality, like looking ahead, for example, we do now a lot of experiments on animals. Can they look ahead? Can they plan for the future? Can they plan for tomorrow? We do these experiments now with apes and with birds. And yes, animals can actually look ahead and can make plans for the future. And so that kind of rationality is not uniquely human. We may be able to plan much further ahead, like a couple of years. I'm not sure we have evidence for that in other animals, but still the basic capacity can be found elsewhere.
Nice. So there is then again the next thing. So if let's say that we are more driven by emotions, maybe less rational, then what is the foundation of let's not talk about religion, but we can talk about faith in general, or to say about blind faith. So what do you think the foundation of blind faith in humans, or if there are also some studies or observations from apes?
Yeah, belief in the supernatural, I'm not sure we have that evidence. There have been speculations about spirituality in other animals, like in chimpanzees. For example, chimpanzees react to sudden weather events, like a sudden downpour, sometimes with dancing. It's called the rain dance. And there's other observations of chimpanzees in the field doing ritualistic things that we can't explain, and we don't know why they do it and what it means. So there have been speculations about spirituality in other animals, but human religion in the sense of having specific supernatural phenomena that we believe in, I don't think exists. So that seems a uniquely human. Well, if you call it an advantage, some have called it delusion, of course. It seems like a specifically human delusion to believe in these things.
Yeah. And so then your work, like you started working, of course, with primates, and then you've done a lot of work on empathy, on morality. So what do you think? The human morality, is it cultural or it's inherent?
Yeah. I started working on the evolution of morality when I discovered that empathy exists among mammals, especially in the primates, but I think in all the mammals. And so I got interested in that because chimpanzees, for example, if someone is distressed and has lost a fight or has fallen out of a tree or whatever the reason is, they will go over there and embrace and kiss and calm them down. And so they reassure the distressed. And bonobos will do the same thing, often in a more sexual way. Bonobos are our closest relatives too, like the chimpanzee. And so empathy responses, because in human children, this is called empathy, if they reassure a distressed individual. Empathy responses have now been found in all the mammals, and there are rodent studies, the mice and rat studies on empathy. So when I discovered that empathy exists in species close to us, I, of course, immediately ran into the literature that claims that empathy and compassion are the core of human morality. And I live in a country in the US where many people believe that morality comes from God. So morality is handed down by God, who tells us how to behave. And that cannot be true, in my opinion, in the sense that our current religions are a couple of thousand years old, 2, 3, 4,000 years old. But our species is much older, and primates are much, much older. And so if morality comes from basic emotions like empathy, as David Hume has always said, the moral sentiments, then morality is much older than the religions. And so morality precedes religion. Religion may play a role, for sure, that's very well possible. So I got interested in that topic of the evolution of morality. I think human morality has a few special elements that we don't find in other primates. But as a whole, being upset by injustice, for example, we do experiments on fairness in monkeys, empathy, following rules, social rules, and not accepting that someone violates the rules. All of these things can be found in the other primates. And so some of the basics of human morality, I call it the building blocks we can find in other species, and then humans add some superstructure to it, which you could call the justification of these rules. Once we have designed the rules, we start to justify them and explain them and give reasons for them. And I don't think other primates are doing that.
Yeah, you have some nice experiments with the reciprocity. So if you can, I don't know, define probably one of them, it'll be interesting to know.
Yeah, reciprocity is very much a part of primate society, and reciprocity in humans is surrounded by morality, because if I do you a big favor and you never return the favor, and you even refuse to do me a favor, I will get very upset, and that's a moral reaction, because you're supposed to return favors that you get. So human reciprocity is surrounded by moral rules, and reciprocity is easily demonstrated in many of the primates. And so, for example, we have done studies where we look in the morning in the chimpanzees, who grooms whom for how long, and then we give them food to share, and then we see who shares food with whom. And you can see that the ones who have been, if I have been grooming you, for example, you will be more likely to share food with me in the afternoon. And so we can demonstrate that. We also do studies on fairness. And so the most famous experiment, which is on the internet and has been seen 200 million times or something, is an experiment with 2 monkeys side by side. And one monkey, they do a very simple task, like we throw a rock into their enclosure and they have to give it back to us. One monkey gets grapes and the other one gets cucumber. Now, cucumber is normally a reward that they will work for. They think it's perfectly fine. But when the other one is getting grapes, they don't think it's fine anymore. And they get very upset and they refuse to work and all of these things. And so in these capuchin monkeys, there's a strong reaction to unfairness. And this reaction has now been demonstrated in a few other animals as well. And so animals who cooperate, social animals, they tend to watch what they get, and they want to get for the same work the same thing as everybody else. And so that is a strong tendency, which is relevant today with all the worry about income inequality. We have that same strong reaction, and that's why we get very upset if some of these billionaires fly to the moon and are proud of it. I mean, wasting money on that kind of stuff, we get very upset by that.
Yeah, and what do you think, why it is important for all the social animals? Because I think for sure it'll exist in all the other social societies as well?
Yeah, so it exists in dogs, which are cooperative hunters. They descend from cooperative hunting animals. It exists in capuchin monkeys and chimpanzees, who are also hunters. We think it has something to do with intense cooperation. If let's take hunting. Let's say I go hunting with you regularly, and you take all the meat. I get only a few scraps. That means I need to start protesting against you, or I need to look for a better partner. I'm sure I can find a better partner who shares with me. And so I need to be sensitive to what I get out of the collective effort that we have made. That is where I think the sense of fairness comes in. And if you don't do that, you get exploited, of course. Then that's pretty useless to be a cooperator in a system where you get nothing out of it. And so I think in these cooperative animals like chimpanzees and capuchin monkeys and dogs, there is a high sensitivity to effort you put into the collective and the rewards you get out of it.
Yeah, nice. So if we now, since we are talking about hunters, maybe we can also talk about hierarchy. So you have interesting sort of comments and observations on hierarchy. Do hierarchies exist? Why do we need them in human society, for example?
Hierarchies exist everywhere. You put a bunch of young puppies together, dogs, they will be, the first day, they will be fighting and establish a hierarchy. You put kids together in a daycare center who've never seen each other, the first day is chaos. They will be battling with each other. Establishing a hierarchy is everywhere. And so I don't know why some people sometimes deny the tendency to form hierarchies or want to go against hierarchies or have the illusion that, for example, men are more hierarchical than women. You know, the word pecking order comes from hens, not from cocks. And all female animals have hierarchies, baboon females, chimp females, bonobo females. And in humans, if you ever look at an all-girls school or a nunnery or a female prison, hierarchies are everywhere. That doesn't mean they're good or bad. I think they regulate competition. And so they avoid a lot of fighting, because once a hierarchy is established, which may take a couple of days or a couple of weeks or whatever it takes, then it reduces aggression, and aggression goes down once it is established, because there is each time you meet someone, you know where you are in the system, so to speak. So it is an unfair system. You could look at it as unfair for the ones who are lower in the hierarchy, but it prevents a lot of chaos and a lot of violence between individuals. So I'm not saying it's good or bad, but all social animals tend to form hierarchies as soon as they recognize each other individually. There's even fish who form hierarchies if they recognize each other individually. You get that kind of arrangement. And what I think is striking about hierarchies, and that is underestimated by people, is that the ones at the top have certain responsibilities. That's an interesting thing for me. So in chimpanzees, for example, the highest ranking male, who doesn't need to be the biggest male, because chimpanzees have a political system with a lot of coalitions, and so sometimes the smallest male is the alpha male. So the highest ranking male usually breaks up fights in the group, stops fights, and protects the underdog, protects the weak against the strong, and acts as a conciliator. He consoles individuals who have been beaten up by somebody, or he protects them. And so he has certain responsibilities. And if the male is good at this, a good leadership, he gets supported in his position. Then as soon as there's a challenger coming, try to dethrone him, the whole group is going to support that alpha male because they want to keep him. If he's not a good alpha male, if he's a bully, because we have those too, if he's a bully who exploits everybody and terrorizes everybody, then as soon as there's a challenger, a couple of years later, they're going to put their weight behind the challenger and he's going to be dethroned. And sometimes these males end very badly. That's of course known of humans too. And so we have bullies too. And so not every leader is a good leader, and we try to get rid of them at some point.
Yeah, so you already hint at this, but then where does power lies in the hierarchies? If we just want to summarize your observation.
Well, power is derived from your connections. So a male can be physically dominant because he's much stronger than anybody else. That doesn't mean he has the power. I've known older males who are not at the top anymore, who have more power than the alpha male. And I've known Mama, the book that I wrote about Mama, the chimpanzee female, she had more power than almost any male that I know, because she was alpha female for 40 years. She had all the connections, and any male who would go against her would get all the other females also against them, because she could mobilize all the females, basically. And so Mama had an enormous power, and often decided who would be the alpha male, because she would put her weight behind a certain male. And so, yeah, then you get the question, if the position of the alpha male depends on the alpha female, who is the more powerful of the two? That becomes the question. So he may be dominant, and everyone may be bowing for him and all of this, but still, if Mama withdraws her support, then he's in trouble. So that's an interesting question, what you call power. And I always like to make that distinction between power and dominance, because when people say primates are male dominated, I always think, well, you know, there's lots of females who have a ton of power in these groups.
Yes, and of course, in this discussion, we need to include bonobos as well, where these societies are different, or elephants, for example. Maybe you can also elaborate on that, since we are in 21st century and basically the century of feminists. I think it's also good to bring those examples from the nature where matriarchs are also leading the societies.
Yeah, so bonobos are exactly equally close to us as chimps. The people often don't know much about bonobos because chimpanzees were discovered first, and everyone has elaborated the connection with chimpanzees, but not with bonobos. But genetically, they're exactly equally close to us. Bonobos are female dominated. So the alpha female is not just the highest female, but it's the highest individual in the group. And we have known this since the 90s, but anthropologists never wanted to hear this. They didn't want to hear about bonobos. They put them aside because bonobos are peaceful. They don't wage war between groups. They mingle between groups. When the groups meet, they have sex and they groom, and then the kids play together. It looks more like a picnic than like warfare. So they're too peaceful, so to speak, and the females are dominant. And so the anthropologists, since they have this whole narrative about human evolution, where we got where we are by eliminating everybody else, including the Neanderthals, so we are the masters of this world, they didn't know what to do with bonobos. And so they tend to say that bonobos are not relevant. But I think they're exactly equally relevant. And I'm fascinated by bonobos. And I think the intergroup mingling we can explain, because it's the females who run the show in the bonobos, and the females want to meet females of the other group, and they sit together and they groom together and the kids play together. There's now observations of food sharing between different groups of bonobos. There's even recently an observation of adoption of orphans by females in this group from that group. Things that in chimpanzees are impossible, because in chimpanzees there's only hostility between groups. So I think bonobos are extremely interesting. I'm at the moment writing a book on gender, because you mentioned gender.
Yes.
And I'm so glad I can work with both. I know both species very well. I can work with both. And I think we have a little bit of both. For example, male chimpanzees, apart from being very competitive, they're also very bonded. The males they hang out a lot together and they do things together. That's a very human-like phenomenon, because human males too, they're at the same time that they're competitive, they're also friends, and they hang out together. So I think there's all sorts of parallels that you can draw, and I think bonobos enrich that picture enormously.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, since you mentioned about anthropologists going for chimps rather than bonobos, So I see it as a bias, that maybe it's I don't think it's a deliberate, maybe I think it's unconscious bias. So if we can talk about that, because it's really important how we sort of choose our favorites, like in
Yeah.
pets, in animals, in different species, what we want to save, what we don't want to save, for example. Uh,
Yeah.
what do you think? What's your observations about this unconscious bias that we have in our society?
Yeah, I think anthropology has traditionally been dominated by men who went around the world, and what they saw was brotherhoods and initiation rituals and warfare and men doing things, men using tools, all of this. And they didn't look much at women. I think they didn't care much for women, and they had these theories that women were important exchange objects. The men ran the groups and they could exchange their daughters or things like that. And then anthropology got invaded by a lot of women, a lot of female anthropologists. The same thing happened in primatology, but maybe 20 years before the anthropologists. We were earlier with that. And then women came in and they started to see different things, and they got interested in different stuff. Like there are women who are interested in the grandmother role. What do grandmothers do in society? Things like that, which the men had totally ignored. So I think there is a shift in anthropology, but male anthropologists, they are still very focused on male dominance, warfare, men using tools, all of that kind of stuff. And so there is a bias there. That's a gender bias. But the other biases, so the bias towards violence, being interested in violence, that started after World War II. For logical reasons, I think that we were very obsessed by violence at that time. And everything that humans did or animals did was explained in terms of aggression and violence. And that was all the theories we had. And it is still so today that if you describe human behavior, you describe bad behavior, like killing each other or whatever, you say they're acting like animals. That's what we say. If you describe good behavior, like humans who are nice to each other and help each other and altruistic, that's something we claim for ourselves. The good behavior is of our making. The bad behavior comes from nature, basically. And I've always resented that kind of bias, because I think the good stuff that humans do, the empathy and the positive emotions, also come from our primate sociality. But yeah, that is there are all these biases to deal with. There's also racial biases, of course, in that most anthropologists used to be white. So that's another thing. So yeah, there's a ton of biases, and it is important that we punch through holes in them and that we criticize them, because not everyone realizes how strong these biases can be.
Interesting, yes. So at some point of your career, there was a moment, the incident that happened with Lewitt. Are you comfortable talking about it? Maybe you can tell us about this incident and how it changed your career itself.
Yeah, so Luit was a male chimpanzee in a large colony that I worked with as a student, and he got killed. He got killed by two other males who plotted against him, I think, and they killed him in the night cage, where they would spend time together apart from the colony. In the daytime, they were mixed in with a very large chimpanzee, 25 chimps. And in the daytime, that would never have happened, because Mama, the alpha female, would have stepped in. The females did not. If the males were politicking and confronting each other, they didn't usually mess with that. But if males started to bite each other and make injuries, the females would sometimes step in and stop the whole thing. And so Mama would not have accepted this, but this happened in the night cage when the males were away. And apart from killing Luit, they also castrated him. And so this is actually something we know now from observations in the field. It's not just in the zoo. In the field, we have multiple observations of male chimpanzees, not just killing and attacking each other, but also castrating each other. So I was extremely shocked by this. All the more so because at that time, this kind of violence was not very well known in chimps. We knew a little bit about it from the field, but I had always assumed this could only happen between males who didn't know each other. But these males, they knew each other very well. So I was very shocked, and this was around the time that I moved to the United States to take a position there. And I decided that I needed to focus more on peacemaking tendencies and socially positive tendencies than on aggression. Until that time, everyone, including myself, was focused on aggressive behavior in animals. That was the big thing. And this was influenced by Konrad Lorenz, the Nobel Prize winning scientist who had written a book, and it was called On Aggression. I decided I need to have a totally different focus. I'm going to focus on cooperation and empathy and reconciliation. And I'm going to focus on the things that hold a society together. Because I know that the aggression exists. No one denies it. I'm not going to deny that it exists. But I didn't want it to be my focus. And so that's how it affected the sort of things that I went to do.
Yeah, interesting. So the question actually that I was thinking from that story is do animals grieve? Do they feel that pain, loss, losing someone? What do you think? What's your observation?
They do. All animals who have strong attachments, and attachment is very common in the animal kingdom, they have loss. And whether you call it grieving or not, they go into a depression. So chimpanzees, for example, if someone among them dies, they usually don't eat for a couple of days and they become very silent, which is an unusual situation for them to be silent. If they see the body, nowadays the zoos have learned that you need to show the body of a dead companion. In the old days, they would just remove it. If you show the body, they have a very strong reaction to that. It's as if they know that this is irreversible. For some reason, I don't know how, they realize that someone is dead and gets cold. It is an irreversible process. They don't expect this individual back. So they have some understanding of mortality. I always say they have an understanding of the mortality of others. I'm not sure. We don't have evidence that they know about their own mortality or that they worry about it, but certainly of others. And so they have a very strong reaction. And grieving, yes, these attachments, for example, if a mother chimpanzee loses her baby, she will carry the dead body around for weeks sometimes. Same has been observed in orcas, killer whales. A female lost her calf and she dragged it around in the ocean for weeks. And so it's very hard to lose these attachments once they are there. And yeah, I think there are grieving processes, very similar to those in humans. Yeah.
So if we see basically all these examples, they shows the importance of those social connections, which generally they fade away when, especially nowadays when we are, dealing with all the social media and everything, where we may not connect with the person who is sitting next to us, but we may connect with the person who is sitting miles away. So here, I think one more factor which plays an important role is that consciousness, being aware of yourself and of the others, and also the sentience. So you have you have defined both the terms in your last book. I could feel that there is a lot of new information coming in this in this field as well, like connecting consciousness with the emotions. So how do you define sentience and consciousness?
Consciousness, we really don't know. I always feel that consciousness was invented by people who, before that time, used the word soul or something. Like humans have souls and animals have no souls. No one knew what a soul was, so it was hard to disprove this position. And the same is true with consciousness. People now say we are conscious, but animals are not. And I don't has it, but no one tells me what it is. So consciousness is so hard to define, but I do feel that there are certain things that we humans cannot do without being conscious. And that's the stuff that we should look for. So for example, you cannot plan a party for tomorrow for your friends without being conscious of it. You need to decide who you're going to invite, at what time, what they're going to drink, what kind of music you're going to play. You have to take a lot of decisions, and you do that consciously. So if planning like that takes consciousness, then we can look for planning in animals. And we do experiments. For example, people do experiments where they give a chimpanzee a tool that they can use immediately for a small reward, and another tool that they have learned they can use tomorrow for a much bigger reward. What does the chimpanzee do? He doesn't touch the first tool. He waits with the second tool in hand for the next day. So we do these planning experiments, and since chimpanzees can plan ahead, and some birds can do that, and orangutans can do that, and elephants can do that. So since some animals can do that, they must have consciousness, because we cannot do these things without consciousness. Why would they be able to do it in a different way? That would be sort of ridiculous. So I think there are this kind of indirect indications of consciousness in other species. And sentience is a much broader issue. Sentience is that you experience states like pain and pleasure. Those would be the most basic states, pain and pleasure. And yeah, people have debated to death whether fish have pain, for example. But I think we now have settled on the idea that all vertebrates, at least, but maybe also invertebrates like insects, are sentient, that they're experiencing internal states.
Interesting. If we think about that, of course, the other species, they are also sentient. Then also, it brings us to another topic called welfare, animal welfare, or the other species welfare. And what I see that you have an interesting take on the roles of zoos in the society. So what do you think? Do we need zoos? I mean, of course, there are people protesting against animals in captivity, etc. What do you think about it?
I think we are so urbanized now, the human species, that we need that connection. So the zoos in the US, for example, I don't know how it is in other countries, but in the US before the pandemic, the zoos would attract per year 175 million people per year. That means lots of people go to zoos. And I know many of these people just go there to eat ice creams and walk around with their children. I know that. But in the meantime, they get a little bit of education, and they see these animals, and they're interested in these animals. And I think seeing an elephant up close is different from seeing one on TV. So I do feel zoos play a role in making us more aware of the richness of the natural environment around us. And good zoos treat these animals well. They really take good care of these animals. There are, of course, many bad zoos, and I have no patience with bad zoos that lock a tiger in a small cage and that's all they do. I don't care for that kind of zoos. But the good zoos, they generate money also that can be used partly for the zoo itself, but also partly for conservation projects and education projects. And so I think zoos have an important role to play, have always played an important role in making people aware of the animal kingdom.
Interesting. And so from, of course, when we are talking about animals in captivity, then we'll have to talk about the animals in captivity for the research. And I also followed Chimp Haven, which is, I think it's brilliant project. Maybe you can just tell us about this also.
Yeah, I've been on the board of Chimp Haven for, I think, more than 20 years, or since the beginning almost. And Chimp Haven is an organization in the US that receives ex-lab chimps, because chimpanzees are barely used anymore in biomedical studies. That's completely over. That means, and we're not breeding with chimpanzees anymore. So young chimps are basically not available anymore. And we have all these retired chimpanzees, basically, that go to Chimp Haven. And Chimp Haven is a beautiful facility, outdoor facility with large islands on which we then release these apes who come from laboratories. A chimpanzee can live up to 60 years, most of them up to 50 years. So they have a long life still ahead of them. And chimpanzees are never terminated. With, for example, with rats or something, people would just kill them if they don't need them anymore. That has never happened with chimps and will never happen with chimps. So chimps are moved to a retirement facility, and in this case, a beautiful one. I'm really proud of Chimp Haven because it's outdoor forests, and these chimps who have lived in a small cage then have to adjust to social life and adjust to a much richer environment. And they do. It's remarkable how well they can adjust to this new environment.
Indeed, it was so fascinating to see their reaction once they reached there. But then also, what do you think about animals that they are in dairy, or in farms, which we are using, of course, for the meat?
Agricultural animals is actually, that's the vast majority. So billions and billions of animals are in the meat industry, because animals in research and animals in zoos, those are small numbers. And animals in zoos, I think in a good zoo, they live in paradise compared to the way we keep pigs, for example, that are raised for meat. So people may focus on zoos, but zoos are not the big problem. The big problem is the meat industry. And I think I'm personally not against eating meat, maybe because I'm a biologist and we know how many animals eat meat, but I'm against the poor treatment that these animals receive. I think we can do a much better job, and I'm waiting for the day, I'm praying for the day, so to speak, that we don't need to raise animals like this anymore, because there is, of course, an alternative meat industry coming up, and an artificial meat industry is coming up, and is going to be successful, I'm sure, because it has ecological advantages and moral advantages. So it has to be successful. So that's going to come. But in the meantime, in the 20 years or so that we still have the meat industry and still eat animal meat this way, we need to do a much better job at treating these, how we treat these animals, and give them more space and more opportunities and a more enriched life and so on. And reduce, in the meantime, that's only possible if we reduce the meat consumption. So yeah, that's sort of the measures we need to take in the meantime until we have artificial meats that satisfy everybody.
Yeah, so you also have one comment, like if you are born as an orangutan today, whether you'll prefer Borneo or these zoos. And
yeah, that relates to the situation in the wild. So if people complain about zoos, I always think, well, there are animals at zoos who would not survive in the wild, because the wild doesn't exist anymore for them. And orangutan is a good example. In the last 20 years, 100,000 orangutans have disappeared from Borneo, the island in Indonesia. That's about half the population of orangutans has disappeared in 20 years. They're being shot by farmers. Their forests are being burned down. And so if I were an orangutan today, you would ask me, do you want to be in Borneo or in the zoo? I think I would choose the zoo. I would be treated much better there than in the wild. And so when people object to zoos, you always have to keep that in mind, is that the wild is not a paradise. The wild can be a very difficult situation, and it is already very difficult normally, but we are making now, our human influence is making it sometimes horrible.
Yes, actually why I mentioned it now is because today is International Orangutan Day. So okay. I would of course urge all the people who are participating here, they can spread a message about it and also talk about the condition of orangutans and see how you can support their survival. Now maybe we can also move on for the questions. For next 10-15 minutes, we take few questions and then we can hang up. So probably, so guys, just raise up your hand and then I can just call you by name.
Don't be shy.
So exactly. Meanwhile, I have 5 questions in the chat, but I'll see how many we can take now. Um, she's saying thank you for wonderful and interesting talk. It was really nice to know how close we are to the other primates. So the first question is, any incidences of the concern for nature or other species in chimps?
Concern for other species. Well, in chimps, I'm not sure, but we have a few observations of animals helping other species. Like, for example, in dolphins helping human swimmers, whales helping other whale species against orcas, which are killer whales, which are predators. So yes, we do have sometimes observations of animals helping each other, probably in reaction to distress calls that are maybe similar to the distress calls of their own species, and they react to it at that point. So it does happen, but it's not common. So you have to think empathy and altruism evolved to help your friends and your family, basically. That's how it evolved and why it exists in us and in other species. And applying that same tendency to a completely different species, like we sometimes do when we empathize with a dog or whatever we do, is not typical. That's not what empathy evolved for, and it does happen, but it's not typical.
Yes, and the next question is if there is any equivalent of art or music in other species, in chimps, for example.
No. Well, music, of course, in the birds you find lots of
Birds,
music.
yes.
And actually, Mozart wrote a whole symphony based on the song of his bird. And then the musicologists, they didn't like that suggestion because Mozart had written down in his notebook how his bird sang, and he used that as an inspiration for a whole symphony. So yeah, there's a lot of research now on music abilities in other animals, where they see if they can follow a rhythm, can they produce a rhythm, can they understand notes, how do they react to Western music or any other music. There's a famous experiment that was done with starlings, I believe, who were in a cage and they could sit on one perch or the other perch. And if they would sit on this perch, Mozart would play. And if they would sit on this perch, Schoenberg would play. And the birds preferred Mozart over Schoenberg. So that kind of experiments is being done. We did experiments with our chimps because it was said that chimps were indifferent to Western music or to human music. And we played, I think, Indian music and Western music and Japanese rhythm sections. And the chimps preferred the Indian music over other types. So we've done that kind of stuff, and people are exploring the music abilities of animals, but their own production, like chimpanzees will drum on trees and they have a good sense of rhythm sometimes. So they that kind of things is produced sometimes, but of course chimpanzees are not very melodious in their utterances, so beautiful music doesn't come out of them.
Very interesting. So there is another question from Devendra Mohan Mathu.
Sir, my question is, are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I think I can hear you, yeah. Yeah.
My question is, how an animal feels when in a slaughterhouse, when other animal of his type is being slaughtered for the purpose of meat there. What are the emotions experienced by an animal who sees an animal, other animal of his kind, slaughtered in the slaughterhouse before him?
So you're asking how they recognize what the other one needs and what the other one feels, so to speak?
Yeah.
In the slaughterhouse.
Oh, in a slaughterhouse.
In the slaughterhouse, the animals who are watching that they are, colleagues, basically, that they are getting slaughtered. How do they feel, or if there are any observations?
I think they're horrified. So yeah, so the there is a woman scientist, Temple Grandin. I don't know if you know her, but she does work on studies slaughterhouses and how to treat animals. And I think she emphasizes that it's not good to show them what's going on there. And she tries to make the slaughterhouses more humane, so to speak. Even though that's of course a bit of a struggle to make a place where you kill them a humane place, but certainly there are improvements possible. But I think if they would directly observe what happens, they would be extremely effective.
And there is another question from Neha. If you can please turn on your mic.
First of all, thank you very much for the wonderful talk. I have a couple of questions, but I'll just keep it short. The question is like these basic moral traits that you described, like fairness, reciprocity, empathy, cooperation. So according to your observations, I can say like science show that these traits are shared between primates. So one point of view is that an individual may show these basic traits out of self-interest. Like for example, showing its power or holding a position. So he's showing these traits because of these selfish interests. So question is if there are any observations that show that there can be selfless interest in expressing these traits among the primates.
Yeah. So in biology, we always assume that if a characteristic exists, it must be doing something positive for you and your immediate relatives, maybe your offspring and things like that. And that's how they evolve. But once they exist, they can be expanded. So for example, human empathy evolved clearly to take care of your family and your immediate relatives. But it can be applied to a stranded whale. We push the stranded whale back into the ocean, which is empathy, which is really an expansion of the original function of empathy. So it's very common for characteristics to evolve for one reason and then be used for other reasons and to expand their use. And I think that happens. Now, in chimpanzees, we sometimes see altruistic acts that are very risky. For example, if a chimpanzee in the wild is attacked by a leopard, which is very dangerous for them, and they have a special scream when that happens, others may come over to chase the leopard off, which is a very risky business. They should be staying away as far as they can from the situation, but no, they're going to go help the other one. And so chimpanzees also have been known to save others who are drowning, to pull them out of the water. They cannot swim, and so it's very dangerous for them to get close to the water. And so they perform high-risk acts of altruism. And whether these are ever repaid to them, that's not clear. We don't know if how that's going to be repaid and if that's going to happen. And at the moment that they perform these acts, of course, they don't know if they're ever going to get repaid for this behavior. So there is high-risk altruism. And so I would say once these tendencies exist to help others, they are sometimes applied in circumstances that you could call highly altruistic. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting to know. And if the time allows, can I ask one more question?
Yes.
Okay, so this has nothing to do with these moral traits, but like a very different question related to dreams. So are there also any evidence that chimps or other primates, they have these dreams that they, experience? Or maybe in the animals that were first kept in captivity and they show some kind of traits of these having some dreams, traumatic, from their past traumatic experiences?
You mean, can they be traumatized and for forever? Or, yeah. Yeah, we actually do research on bonobos in a sanctuary. And in the sanctuary in Africa. And the reason they are in the sanctuary is because of the bushmeat hunting in Africa. So their mothers are shot, are killed, and then the babies end up in the sanctuary and are raised by humans and grow into adults. Now, the traumatized orphans in these sanctuaries, They differ in behavior from regular bonobos. They have trouble with empathy, for example. They have less empathy for others. And this is also known for traumatized human orphans, because there are studies of human orphanages in Romania, for example, and these children have a lot of emotional problems. So yes, permanent trauma can occur in the apes. And the good news of the bonobos in the sanctuary in Africa is that they get over it. After a couple of years, they grow out of it. So they do better after a while. But yeah, emotional trauma is actually quite common in many animals. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so the next question we have from Dr. Manu Sharma. He says, thank you for the insightful webinar. I would like to know Professor De Waal's thoughts on possible evolutionary significance of the establishment of hierarchy in primates. Also, whether chimps and other primates engage in lying or deception or concealment.
Yeah, they do. They actually do. So of course, they cannot lie verbally. They do not do that, but they can send false signals. And so you may have, for example, an old female who had a fight with a young female and couldn't catch the young female to punish her. She may try to invite the young female with very friendly behavior for a reconciliation. And then if the young female gets close, all of a sudden try to grab her and still bite her or punish her. Of course, you cannot do that kind of deceptions very often, because you get a reputation that you're not trustworthy, and deception is for that reason rare. Also in humans, someone who lies all the time, you're not going to believe him next time, and so you cannot lie too much. If you do, then no one's going to want to deal with you.
Yeah. The next question is from Anna. Thanks a lot for the interesting discussion. And the question is, humans are close relatives of apes. How scientists can be unbiased when they study them? To what extent do our preconceptions influence our interpretations and narratives about observations in animals?
Yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard to, it's already hard to study humans, of course. I'm surrounded by psychologists who study our own species. And I think if it's our own species, it's almost impossible to be objective and neutral. And because we are part of this society, and so we're very much involved. But if you get to animals close to us, like chimps and bonobos, you have that same issue, is they are so similar to us in so many ways that it is hard to keep your distance. And the way we scientists do that is by having protocols of how we collect information on them. So we're not just sitting there and watching them. We collect systematic observations. We have a list of, let's say, 50 behaviors that we define, like, let's say, grooming and sex and play and aggression. And we have all these behaviors, maybe 50 behaviors. And we have a digital device in which we type in who does what to whom at what point. And then later we do analysis on the computer to count, are males more aggressive than females, or do males play more than females, or whatever the counting is that we do. And so we overcome this problem of closeness a little bit by having data collection techniques that are quite objective. So that's how we manage that.
Yeah, and I also remember that for example, the capuchin monkey experiment that you guys did, and you mentioned that you did it like 25 times or 50 times or something to just repeat it like so many times to get the same observation. I think that's also critical.
Yeah. So when you do an experiment like that, what you see on the internet is a video clip of 1 minute.
Exactly.
But the study itself takes like 2 years, because you do many different monkeys with many different circumstances. And so what you see is not really what the study is. The study is much more than that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry that we are going a bit overboard, but I think we have 3 more people. So 3 more questions, if you can take, and then probably we can close the session. So the next question is from Rima. If you can please ask the question.
Hello, sir. It's a pleasure to meet you. My question is about some behavior problem. I just rescued a German Shepherd. So he's like, in just a week, he was so much overprotective and possessive about me. He's not allowing anyone near me, and especially humans. So I just want to ask, what can I do with that behavior? How can I control him? And what's the reason behind this? Because we have worked upon the behavior of all these species. So it's really very helpful for me as I deal with these babies. I think, is there any trauma behind that, whatever
So what kind of animal is this?
It's a dog. It's a German
Oh, a
Shepherd
dog.
dog.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So yeah, we do studies actually on jealousy, because that's one of the emotions that I think we recognize in other animals who are jealous of contacts and protect their contacts. I don't know what you can do about it. That's going to be very tough because the dog is probably getting very attached to you, and as a result doesn't want anybody else to get attached to you and to be close to you. And sometimes this can be overcome by exposure. So if you have a friend who comes over regularly and can win over the heart of your dog, then maybe that's a possibility. But these things are very hard to overcome, and I know these tendencies are very strong.
Question about the adoption, because I was really impressed from the story of Gorilla and Rosie from the chimpanzee politic books, and basically I want to know if exists a parallelism between adoption in humans and chimps, because you adopt a child in humans because to compensate maybe a lack that you have, an infertility issue or a child loss. But I want to know if it's the same for chimps.
Yeah, I think adoption is actually very common in the animal kingdom, also spontaneously sometimes. So of course,
yeah.
the case that you mentioned with Roosje is something that we arranged, knowing that this female would accept. But in the wild, sometimes adoptions occur because a female dies, so the mother dies, and all of a sudden you have a baby chimp running around, and even males adopt. So females rarely adopt when they have their own child, because they cannot carry two children. It's just impossible for them in the wild, in the trees and everything. So when they have their own child, they cannot adopt somebody else's child. And males sometimes, for that reason, I think males sometimes adopt. And so there are reports of fully adult males who adopt a orphan sometimes for a couple of years. So not just for a few weeks, but for a couple of years, and really take care of them. I think it's very interesting that males have this capacity, which they normally never express, because normally they don't do much with babies, but in this case they do. And so adoption occurs, and sometimes it's a full-blown adoption, like the case with Roosje. That female really took care of her and didn't make a distinction. I think at some point they don't make a distinction anymore between an adopted child and their own child.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Hello, Frans. It was an amazing experience to watch this discussion and also reading your book. It's like amazing. So my question is something related to what Jitendra discussed before about faith. So it is more about imagination. So as humans, we imagine a lot, like we imagine almost everything. So like you tell me that, okay, you stay a virgin for this life, and once you die, you will go to heaven and you will get all the happiness there. Or if you suffer in this life, once you die, you go to heaven and you get all the happiness. So do you think this type of imagination is possible by the other apes?
Yeah, a belief in the afterlife or reincarnation or whatever it is. I think that's a typical human saying. We have no evidence, of course. How would I know? I cannot talk with my chimps and I cannot ask them about it. But as I said, I doubt that they have a sense of mortality. So I do think they recognize the death of others, and they react strongly to it. But whether they understand that they will die one day, there's an interesting story by a Japanese scientist who had in captivity a chimpanzee male who was very sick, who was basically dying. the male remained playful until the last minute, so to speak. He remained playful. He was a playful character, and this Japanese scientist said, well, he didn't seem to realize that his life was coming to an end. He did, because otherwise you're not going to be playful if you think you're going to die the next minute. So he thought that this male had no understanding of the end of life. And so I have my doubts about the sense of mortality in animals, although I do think they understand the death of others. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. That was a fascinating story. Thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect. So thank you so much for the session, for answering all the questions. And you've already mentioned about your upcoming book. We are looking forward to it. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about it? When is it coming?
Yeah, the book title is Different. So that's the main title, Different. The subtitle is Gender Through the Eyes of a Primatologist. And it's about sex differences, but also sex similarities. So, for example, what we talked about is I mentioned that for me, power and dominance are different things. Yes, some species of primates are male dominated, but there's lots of power in the females. And so I discussed that kind of issues and the different tendencies of males and females, and also exceptions to the gender binary, in the sense that we do have always individuals who are not fitting so easily with the male and female distinction. So for example, we had a female chimpanzee named Donna who was a female, but she acted like a male. She had the body of a male and the hair of a male, and she acted like one. And so she might be, I cannot know that for sure, but she might be identifying as a male as well. So it's interesting to have that kind of comparisons. And so yes, my next book is on gender in the primates.
Perfect. So we are looking forward to it, and thank you again to join the session.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone else to join. I hope you enjoyed it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.